Is it really possible to get people to do whatever you want them to do? We're talking about Never Split the Difference with Chris Voss. What up, fam? Welcome back to The Bookworm. It's a segment on my show where we talk about the books that I'm reading and what you can do to take advantage of that knowledge in both your life and in your business. We're going to talk about Never Split the Difference today. This book, I mean, it's been recommended to me millions of times. I know that's an exaggeration, but it's been recommended a lot, and rightfully so. I enjoyed every page of this book, and I took a lot out of it in terms of just, I think we overcomplicate things, or maybe rather we don't necessarily have the right tools to create sales, right? So maybe you're not in a situation where you do face-to-face sales. I still think the psychology of this applies regardless, whether you're in the on or the offline space as a business owner. So I wouldn't deter that or have that detract me from reading this book. I think you're going to get a lot of benefit and value out of it regardless. I always say this, but marketing only works with the psychology. I like marketing psychology, not just marketing, right? I like strategies, not tactics. So to give you some context, if you don't know anything about Chris Voss at all, he's a former top hostage negotiator for the FBI. So he dealt with some pretty bad mamma jammas, right? Like internationally, hostage situations, really bad things, terrorists, I mean, all kinds of just really bizarre stories. And he covers a lot of those inside the book and then relates that to how it works and also how he was part of transforming the way the FBI actually conducted hostage negotiations. So it's a really fascinating read, if for no reason other than that. But there's also some valuable nuggets where he tells you how you can use those principles to apply to your life and business. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into it. I've got a bunch of slides for you guys that I want to go over and kind of educate you on what's in the book. But I really would encourage you, as with all of the books that we talk about, to read it for yourself. This should be a preview of the book, not anything you ever learn from the book, right? There's no substitute for reading the book. I think it's very important that you do so. But my summary is negotiations are more about acquired skill in psychology than sheer natural talent. So I know a lot of people are like, I'm not good at sales. And he actually addresses that. And just with anything else, you need to focus on a growth mindset, right? So you need to look at it in terms of, look, someone that's better than me, it's not because they have inherent skills that are better than mine, or it's that they're just naturally more talented than I am at negotiating. It's just that I haven't put in the time to acquire those skills. So, and we're going to talk more about the science of that, but what they had found is that active listeners are actually better than your yammer talker people at negotiations, right? So if you are a little bit more of an introvert, and so that kind of is that's a huge prominent misnomer that people have about why they're not good at sales, is that they're not the chatty Cathy types. I'm not guilty of that, as you can tell. But my problem usually, and as is the case with many people that are more extroverted, is we just talk ourselves right out of a negotiation. We talk ourselves right out of a sale, right? And so if you're an active listener, I think you're going to find that it's going to be a little bit more natural than you think, especially when you deploy some of these tactics. All right, so that should be liberating for you. All right, so people are emotional and irrational. Negotiations are about building a real human relationship, right? So I think we put way too much emphasis on logic, and Chris's argument is that it's an emotional thing completely. And a lot of the book, he actually talks about ways that you do that, and you kind of use it in a way to put a chink in a lot of armor, right? And to kind of get people to bend in ways that you kind of want them to. But you have to understand that you're dealing with an emotional creature at its core. So again, I talked about this before, being an active listener. Part of that is what he calls tactical empathy. So empathize with their situation and then getting them to empathize with your situation. So the first thing you want to do is break down these walls of tension that are in negotiations or in sales environments, right? So what you want to do is, first, you break the ice. You break the ice with what he calls tactical empathy, right? So make them understand that you not only understand their situation, but you feel their situation as well. When people feel understood, right, they start to open up, and then get them to reciprocate that. He talks about exactly how to walk them through that process. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, so next is the goal is to establish trust, right? So when you can empathize with someone, immediately, what do? Connection. What's another word for connection? Trust, right? So that's a big part of it. So that's the next step in the process, is make sure you're establishing trust. The principles of psychotherapy and the importance of feeling heard by active listening. So he talks about that. Again, we've talked about, but you're actively engaged, you're actively listening, you're using tactical empathy, you're understanding their situation, you're very engaged. A lot of people in sales situations, what they end up trying to do is they try to talk their way into the sale. What you need to do is understand your way into the sale, understand what it is that someone's truly looking for. What's the true depth of the pain point that they're trying to solve? And then do you have a solution that can rectify that? But can you introduce it in a way where they lead themselves to the sale, right? And that's really where that powerful, magical thing happens. But that doesn't happen. You can't lead to that point until they understand that you've been actively listening to what their problems involve or what they're struggling with or what their business needs, right? Okay, so next, this reduces, so the active listening will reduce defensiveness. It empowers in this case, he talked about patience, but also the customer too, right? So immediately, again, easing tensions, easing defensiveness, those are all really positive things that you want to be focused on. And that happens with empathy and tactical empathy and active listening. Okay, so until you can demonstrate to your audience that you hear them, the sales situation will be tense. So again, kind of reiterating that, moving along. Don't forget about the importance of mirroring, labeling, and then he reiterates active listening again. So mirroring and labeling are effectively you're kind of like taking on their energy, right? You're kind of taking that on and like meeting them there. So where they go, you go. Like you kind of not mimic that, but to a degree, it's kind of what it is. And then labeling it is you'd say something like, so it sounds like, so it feels like you're feeling this, or it sounds like you're thinking this, right? To reiterate and get them to clarify and label as such exactly what it is. So if you were talking to somebody about their financial situation with their business, so you would say something to the effect of, so it sounds like right now financially, you guys are just in a little bit of a tough spot, right? Something, and they would say, absolutely yes, right? Because again, you are demonstrating that you understand, you've been listening, you've been engaging, and you can empathize with their situation. So that's very important to get them to validate that you understand. You're demonstrating that you understand what they're going through, and you innately feel that yourself. So very, very important. And then also, too, that doesn't work unless you're at a point where you are literally mirroring where they are, right? So if you're jubilant and they're down in the dumps, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So you kind of want to match and like meet them there, right? So not to the degree that it feels like you're being a phony actor, but kind of immerse yourself and let yourself go to wherever that energy is kind of taking you. Okay, so once people feel heard, you then need to make them feel understood, right? So making them feel heard is part of it, but then they need to be understood. And part of that process is the labeling, right? When you label something, it demonstrates what? That not only did you hear them and were you actively listening, asking questions, engaging, but then when you labeled it, it demonstrates I understand, right? Because they're going to say, this person gets me. And he talks about it in the book, but sometimes that alone, just being understood, will make sales. Because they'll say, he just gets me. How many times have you bought something where you said, that guy just understands where we're at. He just gets it. He just understands us or whatever. Or she too, right? This isn't a mutual thing here, right? Or exclusive thing here. This is where mirroring and labeling are powerful tools, right? So 100% agree, makes them feel understood, which is the next big barrier that needs to come down in the process. Okay, so he talks about, and this is really fascinating. This is a really interesting way of looking at it, and one that I hadn't thought of prior to reading this, and I've used it a lot after. So that's right is what you want people to, that's right are the magic words, right? So when you say something, it seems like you are experiencing X, right? And they say, that's right. The whole thing of that is a lot of people make your right arguments. A your right argument is kind of where you're pitching at somebody and they're like, yeah, you're right. But they're not actually the ones that arrive at, yeah, you get me kind of thing, right? It's you're preaching at me, you're selling at me, and I agree with you, but it's not as powerful as that's right, right? And so we've all been in situations where somebody told us something or they were mentoring us or whatever, where I feel like they were kind of lecturing us about something and we're like, oh, you're right. But we kind of accept that with a little bit of vitriol, right? Like a little bit of disgust that we have to accept that they were right. But when that's right, nobody wins. It's collectively that's right, right? So it's totally different. He explains how powerful that is. And that's the one you're really looking for over a you're right argument, right? So that's right is far better than any of the you're right. And there's three, I think he says three, there's several different types of yeses. There are 3 or 4 different types of yeses. One's a yes, but it's really a yes to get you to shut up and go away. There's one yes, it's like a yes, but it's just saying yes when they're planning on saying no later on. Like, hey, I'm going to say yes now, but I'm just saying yes so you'll go away. And then after the fact, I'm going to call somebody else and say, no, I'm not interested, right? So there's different forms of yeses that aren't as good as a that's right. Something that's truly committed to going through and finalizing the sale. And we've all been in those situations where we've been given those yeses, but we know it's not a real yes, right? And so you're right. and those various forms of yeses are not as powerful as the that's right. So that's really important to remember. So good salespeople make sales. Great salespeople lead people to sales, right? And a that's right argument is exactly what does that. You're leading people, you're understanding, you're listening, you're using tactical empathy. All those things are leading people to sales. You're not making sales. Isn't it magic words that you say? I think that's where people feel like if they're introverted that they're not going to be good at sales because I don't have the magic words. You don't need them, right? You just need to be able to actively listen and engage and understand and empathize. And they're going to you're going to lead them right to the sale. They're going to arrive at the solution themselves. You didn't have to do that. You are the host. You're the guide. You don't have to do the work, right? You just have to help them get to that process, get through that process. Okay, so what can you do to make your customer feel like they made the decision and not that you convince them? So that's the goal, is how do you get them to feel like they made the decision and not you made it for them, right? That's really, really important. And then also he talks about listening to the emotions behind your counterpart's words, right? So basically as people are going through and saying things, you want to understand the underlying emotion that's associated with what they're saying, right? And kind of be reading them, analyzing them. And in that sense, you're kind of understanding like the depth of where they're coming from, being aware of that. And again, that's kind of where the mirroring and kind of leaning into wherever they are at emotionally is going to really benefit you. But you really want to understand the emotions behind what they're saying, not just what they're saying. Look for cares and concerns, and then summarize with it seems like or it sounds like. So that's the labeling part, right? That's the part that you want to come back with. And then consider calibrated questions. Okay, so this is where you are going to get them to start. So first you want to empathize with them, and then you're going to get them to start empathizing with you. This is when you use calibrated questions, right? So if you line all these things up in a row, you can literally create a formula. This is the next part in that piece of the puzzle, is the calibrated questions. So calibrated questions are open-ended questions that start with how or what, right? He says sometimes why, but to really only use why on certain occasions, and it's very rare that you can use it. So stick with how or what. And sometimes he talks about the magic one. I thought I had it here. But basically he talks about the magic one is how am I supposed to do that? Or how are we supposed to do that, right? And that really gets people to think like, yeah, you know what? Those are kind of ridiculous demands that we have, or expectations. That shouldn't be the case, right? So it's further clarification. It's making sure that you are demonstrating that you understand what they're saying, but it's also an opportunity for them to reciprocate the empathy that you have demonstrated to them and the active listening that you've demonstrated to them. So a really, really powerful way for you to do that is to come back with calibrated questions in the form of how or what. So you could be something like, what are your expectations? That was a huge one that my boss taught me way long ago when I had a job 10 years ago at this point. That was his magic phrase, was what are your expectations? Because then they're going to think, you're going to challenge them to think about that. Otherwise, maybe they just hadn't even thought about that. Well, I don't know. I guess 6 weeks does seem ridiculous. It does seem really fast, right? So figure out what those calibrated questions are going to be for you, and always have those in your toolkit so that you can pull those out and use those to get them to understand your side of the situation and not just the other. So you're not in a business relationship where you feel like it's one-sided. And a lot of people get taken advantage of in those situations where they feel like, man, this is so demanding. I don't understand how they didn't understand that this was going to be so challenging. Well, because you didn't challenge them to think about what it was going to be for you, right? And I'm guilty of this too. Like, this is not me standing up on top of my perch telling you to do this. Like, I totally make these same mistakes too. So again, the intent is to have your counterpart see your side once you've demonstrated that you see theirs. So very formulaic, makes a lot of sense, right? So you want to shift from confrontation. So, again, the tense situation, you want to shift from a confrontation to more of a problem-solving session, right? So the calibrated questions allow for you then to start really getting into how does this work well for you? How does this work well for us, right? We want to make sure that we are completely ironing out all of the details so that this is a win-win for everybody involved. And that's what calibrated questions allows you to accomplish. And sometimes these are non-monetary items, right? So if you're really stuck on the monetary aspect of things, if they just can't get over those numbers, he says that sometimes what you want to do is explore the other aspects. So sometimes maybe you do adjust the date. Hey, if pricing's a problem, what if we do it faster? Or if pricing is a problem, how about we do it longer? Or what if we include this as well? Or what if we include that? Even if it's non-monetary things, it could be other services rendered. It could be other things that kind of behoove or benefit them based off what you've learned and gleaned from them, from your active listening. Other non-monetary items sometimes will shift them and be like, okay, with that, I'm totally cool with the price then, right? And we've been in situations where that's happened, so you probably know what I'm talking about. Okay. Here it is. I know I put it in here. The ultimate calibrated question is, how am I supposed to do that? Right? So again, if you need to go back to that, if you feel like the demand's coming in or the expectations are too high, always fall back on how am I supposed to do that, right? So this could be, you could use this in many capacities, not just business. You could use it, somebody comes at you with a ridiculous hospital bill or something like that. How am I supposed to do that? How am I supposed to pay that, right? And then that's going to challenge them to start empathizing with your situation. Well, yeah, well, you have this solution, and this, and maybe we can work with you. So that's how you reclaim things without coming back and saying flat out no, right? You don't want to just necessarily come out and just shoot down and say no, but a calibrated question is effectively a way of saying no, right? So it's a good way. Actually, this is what I put here next. So use calibrated questions as a way to object without saying no, okay? So understand the different types of negotiators. So he talks about there's different types of negotiators. I won't go through all of those here, but there's several different types of negotiators that I would recommend you look into to understand which one you are, because understanding that there's a different, they all operate differently. So you want to understand what's the best mechanism for me and how are these people, what's their disposition, because I'm going to align with those people and really study how they do what they do and do it at a high level. Okay, so he talks about, this is a pro tip, we're getting into the bonus stuff here, we're almost done. He talks about the 7-30-8-55 rule. So effectively, 7 is the things you say. 7%, this is determined based off whether people like you or not, right? So obviously important in a negotiation capacity. 7% is what you say. 38% is the way you say it. And 55% is just how you present yourself, how you show up, the way you demonstrate, the way your face is, the way you carry yourself, the way you conduct yourself. So basically 55% is determined by stuff that's not coming out of your mouth, right? So very, very, very important to remember that you need to be likable, you need to be approachable, and that's going to be something that you want to work on and focus on as far as your presentation is concerned. The things you wear, the way you dress, the way you present yourself, making a good first impression. Understand your customers' values, wants, dreams, religion, etc., right? So you really want to make sure that you understand at a deep level who that person is. If you want to do research beforehand, something that would be very, very important for you to do. And then the power of yes. Okay, so he says that you want to get 3 yeses. There's something magical about getting 3 yeses. So what does that mean? When you get somebody to commit to something, to buy something from you, you want to have them confirm 3 times in some capacity, right? So are you sure you want to do this? This is what it costs. You want to move forward, right? Just to reiterate, this is summarized. This is what it entails, right? Yes, yes, and yes. So you're going to take them through that process. 3 yeses. That's the magic. They're not going to back out once they've committed 3 times. There's some science behind it that he talks about, that it's just, you want to try to get them to confirm and say yes on 3 different occasions, even if it sounds redundant and repetitive and kind of silly. So yeah, and then the last one he talks about, which was kind of a pro tip here, is he talks about what he calls the Chris discount. So in some situations, it's actually good for you to personify yourself and say, okay, guys, I know you don't do this for everybody. He actually talks about when he's at the grocery store, he'll say, do I get the Chris discount on this? And sometimes people will say, like this one time we'll like make it work or whatever. So you're kind of like you're personifying yourself as a human, as a person, not necessarily as like this person that's trying to sell them something or get something from them. And so when you do that, sometimes it will allow you to get a little bit of a leg up or a little bit of an edge or break through maybe a wall that you've been struggling with and just can't get over, right? So awesome, guys. That's all I had for you. I think this book is tremendous. There's so much more. I know I covered quite a bit here in a rapid period of time. But there's so much to learn from this book. One of the ones that I reference more than a lot of the books that I've read, and I read every single day. So highly recommend you check it out. And if you want to check out, I do have a community called Startup Books. So if you are a startup founder and you are looking to read more books about starting a business, that's exactly what we do. We've got an entire platform built around educational and various resources around reading startup books. We've got book notes, we've got implementation kits, we've got weekly insight videos, lectures at the end of every month. It's kind of giving you resources and content around the books that we read, as well as reading plans that you can actually follow along to keep you on task, right? Keep you accountable to keeping up with your read. So it's an amazing platform. I'd love for you guys to check it out. The link is included below. It's called Startup Books, and I'm super excited to have you guys here watch this video. Make sure you like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.